Hi, professionals, and welcome to the boardroom hosted by the Professional Consultancy. What do we do? Essentially, we provide qualitative solutions so that you can achieve quantitative results. Thank you for joining our board meeting, but we promise you will not be bored. I am Dr. Erica Burks, and I am the Chief Human Resources Officer for our illustrious business. And I want to make you aware now, I am the most unconventional HR professional you will ever meet. And my goal is to bridge the gap between leadership and employees by advocating for employees and balancing business acumen.
Well, hello, professionals, and greetings. I'm Dr. Ellison. I'm a military veteran. I am a doctor and expert in leadership, professional development, and training. I love helping you improve your performance from the janitor to the C-suite. I'm so excited for what we're going to talk about today. I have been reading the Constitution. Y'all got your girl out here reading the Constitution, and I can't wait until we have this conversation today.
Well, so the conversation involves politics in the workplace. And I
Politics
know
in the workplace.
it is such a taboo topic, and the HR me is like cringing. It's like nail switch chalkboard because we try to avoid these conversations like the plague. But in true fashion, Dr. Ellison always provides us a formal definition, so I'll away.
All right, so let's start with what politics is. As we know, and let me just preface by saying I am a Southern girl. There's politicking, and yes, I said politicking. There is politicking happening all around us, especially with the advancements in technologies. We are constantly weeding through heaps of information and misinformation and disinformation as it concerns our politics. And if you're anything like me, talking about politics can be stressful, and trying to navigate whether or not we should be talking about politics in the workplace as a leader can be a source of stress. And I definitely want to make sure that we define what politics is. And I'm going to go to the text for that. But before we get too deep, let us establish a shared understanding because that's going to set the tone for our conversation today. So, a politics is a noun. It's the activities of governments concerning the political relationships between countries, political parties within an organization. It's often the assumptions or principles relating to or inherent in a sphere, a theory, or a thing, especially when concerned with power and status in society. And before I pass the ball back to my partner here, with that being said, let us be clear, we are engaging in politics all the time. So it's not just about elephants and donkeys, Republicans and Democrats. In one way or another, whether we want to or not, we are engaging in some form of politics.
Yep. So it's so funny because we are in the election season. Everything is going on. It is almost inevitable that politics come up in the conversation in some capacity. We can go on, but to keep this short, we want to get right to the nitty gritty of it. And then maybe we can make this a part two. It depends on how this goes. So in my experience, we avoid political conversations. And as Dr. Ellison said, political conversations can range from politics in terms of war, elections, governance within the organization. And if you haven't seen it, you have to watch our previous video on compliance in the workplace. But the funny thing is, a lot of organizations expect for you to leave your political perspectives at home, which seems fair. However, I read this article with Sherman. I'll make sure we include it. And basically, they said it is unrealistic to expect employees not to talk about their beliefs at the workplace and to leave them at the door. They pretty much said that if HR teams simply ban, which again, it is not HR that makes these calls, we just simply enforce what was pre-established by C-suite. But they pretty much said if HR teams ban political discussions from the workplace, they risk employees from, or they risk employees feeling like they're being silenced, disengaged, and become distrustful of leadership. What do you think about that statement, Dr. Ellison?
I couldn't agree more.
Mhm.
Yeah, especially with the part about you highlighting and emphasizing HR's role in politics and politics in the workplace.
Mhm. Agreed. Because we don't make the protocol. We really don't. We are just simply enforcing what was pre-established. So whenever I have employees that bring these concerns or feel very empowered or silenced about whatever their beliefs are, I have to remind them this is where that bridging leadership and the employees together comes into play, because they're making the call, they're being influenced by it, and I'm just trying to be the middleman and communicate it. But anyway, my perspective and what I always, and again, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but my experience is, especially utilizing that state or that article, it is inevitable. Like, I cannot say that enough, that we talk about it. So, for example, in one of my previous positions, I'll use the Ukraine incident. There were people that were selling watermelon, and they felt very strongly about it. Their intentions were pure. They wanted to, raise money to send to the Ukraine. 100% understand. However, the organization's policy was that you could not do that. You can only support any foundations or charities that they have approved. So it wasn't about the intent behind it. It was about, this is something we don't allow. That seems like a pretty big deal. On the contrary, we have Girl Scout cookies. Everybody wants to come to work and sell Girl Scout cookies. I love them, to be honest with you. I am not going to pretend like I don't like my own dosey dos. However, when you have that conversation, it's like, okay, this is a serious cause, and I can't raise money to send to these disparaged, these people who are definitely being impacted, but then you allow them to sell cookies to raise money for a different cause. So I am so interested in hearing what you think about that.
From a leadership perspective, and I know you like to speak from your expertise in HR. I've had the opportunity, and God's made me fortunate to be able to work my way up literally from the loading dock up to the C-suite. And so
Mm-hmm.
I understand quite well, as I stated earlier, that politics is way more broad than
Mm-hmm.
Republican, Democrat, Libertarian. Politics is what is standing in the way between you and a piece of equipment that you need. Politics is what can be standing in the way between you getting a percent increase in your pay, or you getting a promotion, or you getting time off work. It's that power dynamic, it's that structure in the workplace that is all considered politics. And so while we talk about politics in the workplace, often we're thinking about, former President Trump, or Kamala Harris is running for office, and we're looking at these political debates, and we're debating over, this policy versus that policy. But what about those workplace policies that
Right.
we often are unaware of, or those things that don't get discussed, the bureaucracies that are in place, the politics that happen in the workplace determines where you are in the organizational structure.
Correct.
And so we often don't consider those things to be politics either. And so, as you stated, Dr. Burks, it is disingenuous for us not to believe that politics doesn't have an effect in the workplace, and for us to not talk about it in the workplace, even if you have the most robust policy that there is. How do you enforce that? Because guess what? Let's just keep it a buck. Eggs are expensive. Gas
Mm-hmm.
is expensive.
Part.
I'm house hunting right now, and the housing market is nuts. And so, to think that employees don't come to work bringing outside in is, I mean, it's just not realistic. And so we have to take into account in the workplace, from the HR perspective, from a leader perspective, from a management perspective, those policies that are set in place by those people in Congress, by your senators, by those people that sit behind the bench, those judges, our sheriffs, all of those things affect people when they come to work because it determines whether or not I can afford to put food on the table, whether or not we're paying our employees the right salaries, the right cost of living for what we're asking them to do based on the current economy. And so those things are politics that people may or may not bring into the workplace, not to mention your, customers and what they bring from the outside into the workplace.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny that you mentioned that. So I have two things, and I'm hoping I don't forget the second one. So the first thing is I see often this expectation where it's like, leave your problems at the door. When you walk in here, you are an employee. You are all about the business. In theory, it sounds right. But this is real life. And like you mentioned, we have a lot of stuff going on. Inflation is kicking everybody's behind right now. And you can't say, well, we want you to be your authentic self at work, which I've heard so many times, but then we want you to leave your authentic self at home. We have some policies in place. So when we're talking about hierarchy and who's, making these judgment calls, the biggest challenge for me is trying to get individuals who are not impacted by what is going on at the bottom. And so what I mean by that are, I've seen attendance policies. One of my previous positions, we had an attendance policy that was so egregious, in my opinion, that with everything that is going on in the world, we want people to have work-life balances. We want all of these things to happen, but you are not creating a space where that is realistically accommodating them. So if I'm a minute late, I'm getting written up or I'm getting in trouble, but it's like it's snowing outside or it's raining or there was traffic. These are acts of God, or these are things that I can't control, but I'm penalized for it. But keep in mind, I live a half hour away from here, or I live an hour away from here. You knew that when you hired me, I disclosed it. So now you, in my opinion, have to extend some type of grace when you know where I'm coming from. So most people won't look at it like, well, this person is very motivated to come into work. We want to keep that in mind. Instead, it is tied to their performance or a behavior. And I think that that is truly unfair. On the contrary, I also think that when you think about politics, a lot of people don't think about the public perception or reputation that is impacted by that. And so, what I mean, for example, I can go back to the Ukraine example, or Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter. I've seen a lot of this in the workplace. And you have people that are Black Lives Matter, but then you have people who are African American and are married to police officers. So it's kind of like, okay, you don't want to support one without the other. And then there's always that risk. People have freedom of speech. So if you don't allow them to express it at work, they're going to express it outside of work, and it's still going to be about work. So when you think about putting these things in place, and when you're thinking about politics, and this is just my humble expert opinion, you have to also think about how that impacts internal and external factors. So I am so intrigued, before I go on, for you to tell me what your thoughts are about that. No, I said a lot, but it's just curious.
So, coming from a military background, um, we're required to support and defend the people of the United States, all of its citizens, foreign and domestic, and its allies, its territories. And with that being said, it doesn't matter if the president is Kamala Harris, it doesn't matter if it's former President Trump gets elected. We're expected to be apolitical and to do those things. And so, with that being said, if an organization fails to incorporate politics within its infrastructure, you're setting yourself up for a workplace that is counterproductive. You're setting yourself up for a workplace where you can have poor recruiting. And I know because the military is one of those places where right now they're struggling with recruiting, retention, undermine leadership. We see that in various organizations.
Yeah.
But guess what? when we're in uniform, when that's considered our workplace, our place of duty, we're expected to adhere to a certain standard of professionalism,
Mm-hmm.
while also being respectful of other people's perspectives and points of views in a way that's healthy and collaborative.
Right.
And guess what? They can't, as I told y'all, I've been sitting here digesting the Constitution and stuff for the past couple of days or so in preparation to be able to have this conversation, because it's important that we talk about things like this. But when I'm outside of my uniform and I'm not rank last name and I'm not in camouflage, I'm not in my service uniform, I can go and protest in said
Right.
cause, or whatnot, as long as I'm not in the official capacity of the name of my company, of the name of my unit, of the name of my, and that is the important part, is that we have to remember that we represent an organization, we represent a brand.
Mm-hmm.
We're trusted to be able to collaborate and work with people that may not think like us, look like us, talk like us, come from where we come from. And how can we establish common ground with those people? Because that's the world that we live in. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what makes Amazon great, is that
Right.
everybody that works there, they don't all look and think the same. That's what make
Mm-hmm.
companies like Apple great. That's what make companies like Walmart great. That's what makes those Fortune 500 companies amazing, is that everybody that works there, they're not robots. They all don't look, act, think the same. They all come from different perspectives. And that, from me talking from a leadership perspective, is the thing that we have to think about. How can we come together without warring internally on the inside, trying to win somebody over to our position? How do we
Mm-hmm.
get that empathy, that understanding? How can we have conversation that is aligned with our mission and our vision and our values, where we can have a disagreement among one another without internal warring and fighting? And so I'll say more about compliance and policies later, but even within the military, there we don't talk about whether we're Republican or Democrat, because guess what? If I get shot on the battlefield and I need you to apply a tourniquet, I don't care what your political affiliation is. I'm just hoping that you apply the tourniquet and save my life. And so, often we don't think that way in the workplace.
That is a whole mic drop. Just saying. So, you made a good point, and I probably shared this on a previous video for us. But one thing that I love when you're talking about the different personalities and how everybody's, opinions, even if those are opposing opinions, help form the framework of an organization. And I remember, speaking of Starbucks, I remember being told that as a part of the training process for Starbucks, for example, they are told to make sure the same customer service is given universally. They are told that the way a drink is made, it is made with the same quality universally, sorry. But they never said everybody has to act the same. Everybody has to have the same personality. Everybody has to smile the same. Everybody needs to jump up and down. And it's just simply we're focusing on the quality of service that is being provided. And I think sometimes organizations forget that we work for the same organization, but again, we are different people dealing with real life struggles, and we're all coming to work, and at the forefront it should be what is the quality of service we are being provided, who is the demographic of client or patient or whomever that we are providing this service to, and have we put policies in place that trump the goal or the mission of the organization, which that is a whole nother conversation for us. But I always tell people, like ultimately when you have a policy, it's political, and you're putting a standard practice into play that impacts performance or how you rate people. Some organizations do like appraisals with team members. So, like, what policy are they following when they're giving you a rating? Or are you just allowing them to give personal opinion? That's not consistent. Is that fair across the board? Corrective actions or disciplinary or even terminating. Have you created an environment where it is okay to have opposing opinions about things? We're just simply trying to make sure you come here and you are a good representation of the organization, like you said with the military, when you're here, and then however you choose to act outside of here is your own prerogative. You have full freedom of speech when you leave here. However, if a policy is put into place that these are the limitations of said um, political standpoint, whatever that may look like, being in an organization may require you to conform. So I am, this topic is, it's like, it's so taboo, but it's also exciting to have, not from an internal HR employee perspective, but just from an HR professional perspective. And I am a firm believer in, you know, there's no, I don't want to say there's no universal approach. Or let me say this, in organizations that I've worked in, they've all had in some capacity the same mindset, but the execution has been different. And sometimes there are biases in certain things. For example, um, we will, using the Girl Scout cookies as an example, which again I love, I'm not mad at it. We'll allow Girl Scout cookies, but then if you want to have a food drive or something that doesn't impact or benefit the organization, then it's like we won't allow that, or we will only allow certain things that are of benefit or that are tangible or that, you know, bring some type of financial gain, or from a external reputation perspective, people will see this and it'll, you know, they'll look admirable, whatever. I can go on and on. But I think at the end of the day, it's all about, what do you want your organization to represent? Can you create uniformity from that expectation? And then how is it being executed? Is it realistic? Is it something that is achievable? Or is it something that only benefits one particular party, like C-suite or leaders in general, where that's not an attainable goal or ideology for people who sit in the field? I like to call them field employees. How can we achieve that without feeling like people are having to silence themselves, or like it can be so contradictory. Like, it's so difficult to put into like one simple explanation. But, you know, does that make sense to you? Or like, do you agree or disagree?
I completely agree with you, and I think to kind of put into layman's terms what you're saying,
Hmm.
have a policy.
Hmm. Basically,
Have
in
some
short.
sort of have some rules in place.
Right.
It is incumbent upon you to establish the standard.
Yes.
As a leader, as an HR professional, you dictate the climate of your organization.
Hmm.
And especially where it concerns workplace matters such as politics
Right.
and healthy conversations and healthy dialogues and how people relate to one another within the workplace, and how do you enforce that, and how do you hold people accountable. You can't do that. You can't be a fair and unbiased person if you don't have any policies in place, if you don't have any rules in place. If
Hmm.
there's a policy in place, it's never personal, it's
Hmm.
always business, because
Hmm.
you can always refer back to the policy. Hey, it's not Dr. Ellison, it's policy number
That
X.
part. That
It's
part.
not
Yeah.
personal. This is the policy. This is the standard. This is
Yeah.
the procedure. You have to put that governance in place,
Hmm.
because that dictates how people conduct themselves in the workplace.
The
That's
number
the
one.
standard for excellence. And one thing I do want to do that is probably the most important thing that I'll do before we conclude our conversation about this today is to put some resources in your hand. This is very important. always, 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 whether you are an employee, an HR professional, a manager, an executive, always check, and I want to make sure I reference my text, always check the National Labor Relations Board.
Mm-hmm.
That is a public facing website. You can get on Google right now. It's the National Labor's Relation Board, the U.S. Department of Labor. Check your state and local laws prior to implementing anything so
Yeah.
that you know what your left and right limits are regarding your freedoms of what you can and can't do in the workplace. Because
Mm-hmm.
guess what? Your freedom of speech in the workplace is you don't have as much freedom of speech as you think you do because it
Yeah.
depends on the type of organization that you're in.
Yep.
Freedom of speech in here, your First Amendment right is I can sum it up in a matter of a few words. In a matter of a few words. And it depends on whether or not your organization is a government entity or
Mm-hmm.
whether it is a private entity.
Mm-hmm.
If the place where you work is considered a private company, they dictate your
Mm-hmm.
communication within the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the federal government doesn't have the right to infringe on your freedom of speech, but guess
Right.
what? Such and such private company can,
Mm-hmm.
or they may be able to, depending on your state laws,
Mm-hmm.
local laws. So, those are some things that you definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, if I don't say anything else today, definitely check that out before you just go out here and start implementing
Yep.
stuff. But always make sure that your organization is rooted in some type of value system,
Yeah.
that you have some sort of policies in place, because if not, there's no way you can go about carrying. There's too many diversity of thought and theory and views and people's life experiences
Mm-hmm.
and diversity of pay scales in the workplace. I mean, there's just too much diversity
Going on.
to foster a completely healthy dialogue if you don't have some sort of right and left limits in place, some sort of system to hold people to account, some to hold
Mm-hmm.
people to compliance. I definitely wanted to put that out there.
It's a matter of checks and balances. And to give an example about the difference in public and private. So I work in an organization where I live in Ohio, and in Ohio, they recently legalized marijuana. So you already could have a medicinal marijuana card if you want, which of course, if you don't know, is tied to a specific disability, and there's a list if you want to go online. And so that was already a thing. And then at, state elections, they voted to make it legal. So everybody thought, oh, well, it's legal now. So I can smoke as much as I want to. I can eat as much as I. And then my organization hit them with, this is still a drug-free workplace. And how they justified it, because you work with children. So they were able to find, I don't want to call it a loophole, but almost like a loophole, depending on perspective, where we can still maintain what we don't want here. And it doesn't matter what the state is saying necessarily. Let me not say that. It doesn't matter in that component. Like, I understand it's legal, but you work with patients, you work with children. We can't risk you being under the influence of a drug, even if it is legal, because then that becomes a patient safety concern, and that has its own legal ramifications. But I think Dr. Ellison did a wonderful job summing it up, and we like to say, make it make sense. And so basically, that's just making it make sense. Checks and balances are essential when you start doing these, policies or implementing these things. If you don't have in-house legal support, then there are other resources where you can get legal support, or have someone review documents where they can specifically help you with these things, or be professional can help you, just saying. And so that'll help you mitigate risk, because ultimately that is why we are here. But if it is okay, Dr. Ellison, before we ended, I wanted to leave us with a quote, if I have your blessing. So, a quote that I found actually came from the U.S. Deputy Attorney General Paul McNulty. And he said, if you think compliance is expensive, try non compliance. And I thought that
Mm,
that was amazing because it's like, yeah, it takes a little more effort. It may be tedious sometimes. However, if you don't invest in it, imagine the ramifications if you don't. So that is all I have. Dr. Ellison, do you have anything else for us?
I just have one final note for you, and this is a very important workplace study just to help tie this up as we conclude our discussion on politics in the workplace. And this is a politics in the workplace study. This is 1,000 participant study, and the findings are critical. More than 50% of workers say they never or rarely discuss politics at work. 45% have regretted having political discussions at work. 51% believe that workplace political discussions hurt the work environment.
Mm,
And 25% have left or wanted to leave their job because of their boss's political beliefs. And with that being said, we talked a lot from the leadership and from the HR perspective, but from the employee perspective, study an organization before you take on an interview or when you're looking for a job. Look and see what type of contributions an organization is making and see if that's a place that aligns with your value system or if that's a place where you even want to work, because believe it or not, there are organizations that are politically aligned to a party or to a cause that you may or may not necessarily agree with. And so, covering all bases from the janitor to the C-suite, this is definitely an important topic to have. If we fail to do these things, it can result in poor retention, high turnover. But I believe, and this is my opinion, that there are some really good benefits to talking about politics in the workplace. I don't think this is something that we can afford to be passive aggressive about. I don't think this is something we should try to sweep under the rug. Oh my goodness, it's almost November. It's time to start voting and stuff like that, and just try to shy away from people talking about, what's going on, on Fox News and CNN in the workplace, because it does encourage creativity through
mm,
diversity of thought in the workplace. It does foster better understanding for what your customers may be going through. Eggs are expensive,
mm.
milk is expensive,
Yes.
and it can also invoke a sense of empathy for others. What are
Mm,
your employees going through? What are your coworkers going through? And I do have a quote for you myself, and this is from the book, The Motive. What is tolerated at the top of a company is often the ceiling of what can be expected deeper within it. So, if I could encourage you, HR leaders, professionals, have healthy conversations,
mhm,
show respect one to another, adhere to policies. And if there's no policy in place, I know our grandmas and grandpas, meemaws and peepaws, mamas and dads, they taught us better than that. Let us respect one another in the workplace and just, out here. At the end of the day, I think most people want the same thing. We want to just live safe and
mhm.
prosperous lives and to have nice homes and things like that. For the most part, most people worldwide are looking for the same things out of life. And how can we have healthy conversations about that?
That's a whole mic drop again. She has been dropping gems this entire video. But no, I concur everything she just said. One, and then I'll be done. One conversation I most recently had is what organizations are creating succession plans. We have individuals who hold these positions and then they retire, and there's nobody that's prepared to internally step up. And then you have to source somebody externally and then hopefully bring them in and be able to, if I can be frank, teach them the game before you're ready to go. And there's no reason why we don't have a practice in place to teach these people how to be more professional. We don't necessarily know. I have some people within my organization that are fresh out of college or fresh out of high school. This is their first big girl, big boy job. And they don't, it's like, okay, I got through the interview, I got hired, but what does professionalism look like? I don't know. So has anything been created that embellishes them? And again, that is a whole nother topic that we can delve into, but we don't want to take your time up too much more. And like I said in the beginning, we don't want you to be bored. We want you to be engaged, and we really hope that in this conversation we provided some context and that you can walk away and have a greater familiarity with the topics that we just discussed, and not necessarily view it as being something that we have to avoid, but to embrace it because it does have value. So like I said, HR is typically a taboo topic. It is something we try to avoid, and I'm saying that as in terms of this is a topic that a lot of organizations have not properly communicated down the pipeline. And so because that does not happen, it looks like it is an executive decision that HR has made. And so it does become complicated a lot of times to try to explain to my field staff what the rationale was with my C-suite leaders. But anywho, we 100% thank you for your time. It has been amazing dropping these gems and having these conversations with you. We love it here. And, stay tuned. We have a lot more content to come. Feel free, if you have a topic that you would like for us to specifically address, feel free to send it to us, or we can just go and maybe talk about some frequently asked questions, Dr. Ellison. Totally your prerogative, but we're here. But anyway, thank you all for joining us and attending our board meeting. We absolutely appreciate your time, and we don't take that for granted. And in the meantime, stay safe and remember to be professional.